let's go back to the first fly. You say
Sure.
you tie it and you fish it under an indicator.
You
How,
That's the most popular method to fish that
okay.
fly under an indicator, but it's also basically what you've made is a little jig. So it's also an excellent fly to fish, cast, and retrieve because it'll pitch. Like when you strip it, it'll come up, and as soon as you pause, that bead now drops the nose down, and it so you get this very seductive motion like this. And I have used it fishing for bass. One example, I was in Oregon and fishing a bass pond, and I could take those flies, strip them, and they land on their nose like this. Like if I take the fly, it will sit on the palm of my hand and nose down, kind of like this, and I can actually walk the fly, hop it like a conventional bass angler uses a jig. So when you fish it horizontally, it's going to sit like this. But if you strip it and cast it, it's going to undulate. So it's got quite a seductive motion and works well as a cast and strip fly. Most people think this is just an indicator fly. And
How
that's by
deep do you
far,
fish it?
that's what most use it for. But you can also strip it.
How deep do you fish it?
Oh, I fished it, a foot under the surface to 20 feet down,
Okay.
right? Yeah. Usually in lakes, we want to try and get our flies within a foot or two of the bottom. Is a good rule of thumb, or a foot or two of the weed tops, because that's where the food is and it's safe to eat down there. We don't get the dry fly fishing opportunities that rivers and streams do because trout just kind of evolved to know it's safer and smarter to eat deeper where life is good and safe for them,
Yeah,
right?
we fish a
So,
lake here in out western Nebraska for a walleye in the early spring, and we fish leeches.
yep.
I'm thinking this would be a great pattern to
Oh
try
yeah,
out there.
I tie these all white as well.
Uh-huh.
And I fish for walleye on my local lakes. It's slip bobbering, right? When you hang them under an indicator. And I fish these, on my lakes, my trout lakes in the summer now get warm, so I go chase walleye. They're a little more temperature tolerant. And so we'll fish them 15, 16 feet down under an indicator. I'm going to admit right now, when you tie these things bigger, it's not a fun thing to cast on an indicator rig, right? You use a big roll cast. The leaders we use when we're indicator fishing are primarily level. So when that fly sinks, your leader is going to hang straight down and get to the depth you want to get. If you use a standard tapered trout leader like a 9 or a 12 footer, they're built like a fly rod, thick at one end, thin at the other, and half of that leader is typically butt section. So when you set your fly to hang at 10 feet, let's say, it's not going to hang there because it's going to come off the indicator and go on like this and come off in an arc. And even though there's 10 feet of distance between your fly and your indicator, it's not going to hang vertically. And that, your fly cannot be getting down as deep as you think it can. So the technique I use, and this is the most complex leader system I use on lakes, I start with Rio's 10-foot indicator leaders in 2X or 3X. This is a leader that has a butt section about 3 feet long. So between my indicator and my fly line, I have a bit of support to help turn it over, to help more efficiently transfer the casting energy from the line to the leader without an abrupt drop. But that butt section on the leader is an orange color. Right where it transitions from orange to clear, it becomes level. And the level section on those leaders is about 7 feet long. So without any addition of leader, you can only fish 7 feet deep. Well, that's not practical. If I want to fish, let's say 16 feet down, I'm going to have to lengthen the leader out. So when we fish indicators, our final tippet section, I like to be about 2 feet long. So we have a swivel a lot of times, little barrel swivel, a micro swivel, and then 2 feet a leader to our fly. So I've got 7 feet of level leader off the indicator leader. I have 2 feet of final tippet section. If you add those two numbers together, it's 9. So in that model, I can reach 9 feet down. If I want to get to 16 feet down, I have to take that number 9 and subtract it from my depth I'm trying to target, which in 16 feet is 6 feet. 9 and 9 less 16 is 6. I add a midsection to the leader, a middle third of 6 feet of fluorocarbon tippet. I triple surgeons knot it to the indicator leader, clinch knot it to the swivel, and I call that the adjustment zone because that's where throughout the day, as I change different depths, I never want to fish an indicator longer than a leader longer than I have to, and that's where I ebb and flow the overall length of the leader. Right? It's in
What
my
what
Orvis. I'll show you the
what weight line or what weight rod are you casting this with?
6 weights.
Six?
Yep, five, sixes for trout. For walleye, sometimes sixes and sevens, but mostly 6 weights. And the
Now,
cast I use for this is a roll cast because
Roll
it's a
cast? Okay.
yeah. So
um,
what you want to do with a balance,
go
like a
ahead.
little midge, cast nice and easy. But these tungsten beaded flies, as soon as they hit the water, they do what they're designed to do. They sink, and of course they'll get anchored in, which makes them tough to get out of the water to cast. So when I'm doing the roll cast, I'll bring the rod back at a little quicker pace, still keeping that fly line on the water for the surface tension that helps load the rod, and that'll swing the fly up. If you bring it back at a brisk pace, not jump it, but just bring it back nice and smooth, a little swift, that'll swing everything, and that fly will be horizontal. Form your D loop. The second it forms, push the fly to that 1 o'clock position and hold the rod there until everything turns over. Now, when I'm fishing walleye with like a size 8 balanced leach, and I might have a 4 millimeter bead on that, that's not a fun thing to chuck. It's an ends justify the means system. And I call it casting the indicator. So that indicator will still flop out there. Your fly may not get out of the water. It's not the end of the world. It's not going to win any casting competitions. It's not going to look pretty, but the indicator flops out there, and guess what? The fly just settles back down underneath anyway, right? So it's because if you start doing this kind of cast, the more times that whole mess is above your head, the more times things can go south and get out of control. So a lot of times, if I'm going to overhead cast, it's just a pickup, hold, and gone again because it'll go. And we're using with indicator fishing, we're not making long casts. Like my general rule is the deeper I'm fishing below the indicator, the closer, the shorter I make my cast because some of those indicator takes, like I was just out on my local lakes last Friday. Now everything's frozen up. So we got one extra day out there unexpected because we had a 3-day warm spell. And those fish were taking leeches, smaller, we call them micro leeches, little size 12s variations. And that indicator doesn't go down. It would slide sideways on the surface like this, or it would just bounce a little bit as the fish, the water temperature was 37 Fahrenheit. So these fish are not very active, but they will eat because the beauty of that leech just sitting there like this is tantalizing. They can't help themselves. And they'll just put their mouth on it and start to move away. And you're just not going to get an aggressive pull down. If that water temperature was, the 40s, low 50s, the grabs are usually a little bit more aggressive because they're cold-blooded. They're a little more active in that time frame. So you keep it close. If I'm fishing 4 feet under an indicator, yeah, I'm going to have a little bit of distance. But the lines I helped design with Rio, now the new Ambassador Series Stillwater floater, that line is designed specifically to cast long leaders and weighted flies and indicators. It's got a short, aggressive front taper, only about 3 feet. Basically, the mass of the line is right near the end of the line. It'll help push over all of this stuff. And it's actually in the head area of the line, the front third or so, it's actually 2 line weights heavier. Again, it's all about getting the mass to turn it over. It's not a dry fly line. It's going to land heavy, but most of our stillwater fishing with floating lines isn't to rising fish. It's to fish deep, and you need a line to help get it out there. If you try and do that with your standard, like a Rio Gold or a technical trout line, it's all about, long front taper, longer. It's about delicate presentation. It's going to struggle trying to cast all that stuff. So right tool for the job.
So you're talking about the tippet or the leader end or the main line that's on the reel for the head assembly?
The head of the line?
Yeah, the head of the line is just like a regular dry fly line, right? It's just
Yes,
your
but what we've
leader.
done, like a regular dry fly line would probably have a front taper where it goes on the head section to where you attach your leader. The longer that is, they move the mass of the line back from the
Mhm.
tip. It's going to transfer energy more efficiently. Well, more delicately, so the tip lands gently and the fly lands gently and doesn't scare fish. With this indicator line, we've moved it so it's only 3 feet, right? So it's a lot shorter, it's more abrupt, and the mass of the line is pushed towards the tip, which is going to help it turn over long leaders, indicators, weighted flies,
And
right?
that's called Rio Ambassador because
Yeah, it's
I fish.
the Rio now has the Ambassador series of lines. I helped design the lake lines. They do it in the midge tip, Aqualux, and the Stillwater floater. And on the end of the line, the other feature of this line is it doesn't have a welded loop. It has a little tippet ring at the end, and you tie your leader to the tippet ring. So this slides through the guides nice and easy. It doesn't jam up like welded loops can. It allows you to on the water line changes without trying to explain this. So, one thing about lakes is we carry a lot of fly lines with us. We're a bit paranoid. I probably got 15, 20 lines on with me at any one time, from a variety of floating lines to different sinking lines for every different imaginable scenario. We're a bit of a paranoid bunch. And changing lines in a float tube or a pontoon boat or even a boat, it's challenging. And humans are, I say, we're path of least resistance creatures, right? If it's tough to do, we'll avoid doing it, right? Kind of like mowing the lawn, raking leaves. Don't really want to do it, try to avoid it, end up doing it anyway. So what you do with this tippet ring connection is you would actually reel the line and leader into the guides, ideally between the reel and the first stripping guide. I take a wooden clothes peg and I pinch the leader against the blank. That's why I use the wooden one, and hold the leader there. And then I cut the leader connection from the fly line to the line, remove the spool of the reel, put the new one on, clinch knot it, trim that end, couple of false casts, I threaded the rod, I'm done.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay. I'm going to do mostly lake fishing. So that's just the reason why we live on a little
yeah,
lake, Storm Lake. It's
yeah.
not deep,
So,
but there's some places that are 17 feet to be able to
yeah,
get to the walleye
yeah,
because we're top walleye lake. Okay.
yeah. Okay. So how's everybody
Phil,
doing for time?
Phil, I have a quick question.
Sure.
So a lot of what I think you're talking about is fishing from a boat.
Yep. Fish from shore too.
And a lot of times here in the Midwest, we're fishing from the bank because we're in
Yep.
smaller lakes, smaller, impoundments, whatever.
Yep.
So we wouldn't necessarily be using sinking tip lines and that kind of thing. But I think these boobies and balanced leach, I think under an indicator could still be a very effective fly for bass, largemouth bass, smallmouth bass,
Yep.
crappie, and even larger panfish.
Yeah.
But is there any different way you would fish these flies from the bank? I'm
Um,
sorry, from the bank.
yeah. No, that's a great question. More or less the same. You can still strip them. I would just use you can fish a balanced leach without an indicator on a floating line. Cast it out and just experiment with your sink times and strip it back. And the beauty of the balanced leach too is it rides hook point up, so it's very snag resistant, right? It's not dragging down and hooking everything. It's riding up. When I go to Argentina, Jurassic Lake, we're fishing from shore because it's known to be rather windy there. Like a 30-mile-an-hour day is considered calm. But the fish love that because that wave action it creates churns up the scuds they eat. But we still fish from shore with single-handed. Yeah, so your indicator at times is having a seizure, it seems. But they like it. And but we also cast and strip. And because it's a rocky shoreline we fish there, it's less snag resistant. I can actually bounce it off rocks and work it through without hooking up. So you can fish them that way. So usually when I'm fishing from shore, it's floating lines, a line called a hover line. It sinks at 1 inch per second, maybe a clear intermediate. You can fish boobies on a gradual slope. That's how they originally fished in England. They take a Type 7 line, fishing from shore, cast this out on a short leader, single fly, and let the line lie on the bottom, and that fly sits up above. It's like a Lindy rig, right? If you think about how that works. So your fly is moving along the bottom, but your fly is is skipping above the bottom, above the weeds, and keeping it where it is as well. So you can do it, but most of the times when I'm bank fishing, it's almost all floating line, slow sinkers, and that's about it. Maybe a midge tip, a lot easier because when you're on the shore, who wants to carry all those other lines with you anyway? It weighs too much.
Thanks. Also, Al Beatty said he had to go.
Yeah, I saw the
He said
comment
tight
there. So,
lines.
yep, yep.
I didn't know
So
if
you
you
want
saw
me to
that.
tie one more?
Uh, sure. We got
Okay.
still 10 participants, so if you want to,
All
you
right.
can.
I said I'd do three, so it's the chatting I do in between. So a good fly for lakes is for a variety of different fish species is a damselfly nymph. And I'll just switch cameras here. One of the challenges with damselfly nymphs is their unique swimming motion. They have that sinusoidal wiggle side to side, and they do a lot of movement, but they don't go very far. But that movement is key in a damsel nymph. So any fly that's got any kind of swagger to it, we do. So this is a Daiichi 11. I got some glue on there. 1120 scud hook in a size 12. I tie these in 12s and 10s. Okay, and I'm going to use some olive thread here. In this case, the nano silk again, just because it allows me to be a little more carefree with my thread wrap. So we're just going to wind this onto the shank. Again, with these smoother nano silks, just kind of overwrap it a little bit. And I'm going to wind back just before I got a little bit further to go. And again, I'm just holding that under tension, jaws open, and just sort of cut with the backs of the scissors to about the hook point. And then we're going to come forward. And we're going to stop about a hook eye width back. And we're going to tie in some eyes. Now, there's lots of different materials you can use for eyes. Small bead chain, monofilament eyes are a common. See if I can get this more centered for you. There we go. But what I'm going to do is a technique I was shown years ago, and I don't see it very much, but I like the look of it. It's I'm using plush chenille or vanille, the stuff you use for San Juan worms. So I'm going to take about a 2-inch length, 3-inch length of it, right? And this is the stuff here you would see. It's called vernille or plush chenille or worm chenille or what have you. It's same product. Every supplier seems to have a different name for it. And I'm using chartreuse just to stand out in the crowd a bit. You could certainly tie these in black and olive, but I often like to use chartreuse for this. So what I'm going to do, this is, I don't know if it quite shows up on camera here, but I've got a full length of it here, good 2 or 3 inches, or to a fisherman, that's about a foot, right? So, because we never exaggerate. So I'm just going to, one end of it, I'm going to tie an overhand knot, right? Trying to keep the majority of the chenille, and I just use my thumb and forefinger to pull on it and make that knot form as round as I can. Now I'm going to turn this around a little bit, and I am going to form a second knot and try to snug it tight. It's a little, so while it's open like this, see how that's open? I'm just going to try and massage and slide that right back against the other eye. See, the knot is still loose. So I've just pulled it back, and then eventually I'll snug it up. And that didn't turn out too well, so we'll do it again. I didn't like too far apart. I'm trying to get 2 overhand knots right next door to each other. So we'll do that again. I got all kinds of marabou stuck on here. There we go. So again, that small overhand knot. Snug that up nice and tight. Try to make it as round, so just play with it. Then I'm going to come in and form a second knot. So I'm going to actually form the knot very close to the other one. And that's why you want the long length, because it's just easier to do. And then we'll just slide this back while it's still nice and loose. Slide this, drop it. Slide it back. Well, it's nice and loose. Because what we're trying to do is put two overhand knots right next door to each other. Not that close. There we go, that's a little better. And we'll just snug those tight, like so. So I've got two overhand knots. Hopefully that shows up, but I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. So two overhand knots. Now I'm going to come in, and anytime I put eyeballs on flies, with the exception of that booby, I tend to tie them on first, so I know where the fly is going to end. So I'm just going to come through and work the thread. I just sort of get them lashed on. Anytime I tie like mono eyes or bead chain, just get them on with a couple of wraps and then turn them into position because I'm going to want them sideways. So I'm just going to come in and just do a couple of figure-8 wraps in between like so. Just go around like you would bead chain eyes or eyes on a clouser, that kind of thing. And then what I'm going to do is make sure the tying thread is right against the back of the eyes, right here against the back. And I'm going to come in, take this tag end, and tuck it in right behind like so. And that's going to round that eye off. Couple of turns. And then I'm going to do the same for this eye that'll be closest to me. Is come right in behind, suck that in, and tie it off. Whoops. Like so. And I've made a nice little set of round eyeballs on this thing. And then we just come in and trim off the excess. So I just come in on a bit of an angle, like so, and we'll tie those down. Add further security to it. And come back to the base of the tail. Sorry, there is no tail. Come back up, and you can see I've got a neat little set of eyeballs there. Then I'm going to take some wire. In this case, I'm just going to use some copper. You could use chartreuse, you could use gold, you could use red, silver, whatever you want. Olive. So this is size small. Use extra small as well, would be fine. I'm going to tie that in along the near side of the hook. Like so. And then come back up a little bit and just put that in a material clip so it's out of the way. And then the body and the dubbing I'm going to use is tied out of either, depending on the color of the damsel you want. This is a dark olive mink, micro mink zonker. They also make squirrel. So we're just going to take the length of this out of the package. And what we're trying to do is, ideally I want to use, it's a little thicker than I'd like, a hide that's pretty thin on this. This must have been a winter mink or something. It's got thick skin. And you can see here, this, it's got that. So what we're going to do, this is relatively nice thin hide. So I'm just going to, it's got a bit of a twist to it here. So I'm just going to come in and trim that out of there. It's driving me crazy. And I'm just going to come in and basically take this and just trim it flush. So it's got like a little buzz cut. I'm going to take this amount of fibers that I got, and this is going to be used for dubbing for my body. So I'm just going to come in, and it's very easy to dub. Moisten your fingers a little bit. Keep it thin. You want to basically make fuzzy thread, and then you're just going to start at the back, work that down. Nice slender body. Damsels are very thin, a very slender creature. Their head and eyes is the widest point. So we're just going to wind this up, right up to the rear of the eyes. Trim some of that spikiness out of there if we want. Trim that away. And then we're going to come back to our hide. we trimmed, this is going to form the shell back and the tail. So I'm going to trim this. So this distance I trimmed, the sits back a little bit. See to the bend of the hook that's bare? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to put a half turn of wire. So this is hanging straight down. I'm going to secure this in directly behind the eyes. So the flat part of the hide, tilt it towards me a little bit, and then it'll roll over just a couple of secure turns like this. Hold that flat, and then just come in and secure that down. And just wind this up and use the wire to add segmentation and bind that strip down. Then we'll come in, tie it off a couple of times, and just helicopter twist and break the wire away. And then we can come in, and again, I should have brought my straight edge with me, but I'm going to, you can do this at the end, the beginning. I'm going to trim this. So this is about the shank length long. I'm going to actually come in underneath and kind of cut up so I don't trim off much, and I leave that little tuft sitting there. And when it gets wet, that's going to slick right down to nothing. And because it's on this hide, when you strip it, it's going to sway a little bit. It's got lots of wiggle in it, right? So that's why you could literally, I think originally I used to leave all of the hide on, but now I mean all of the fur on from the base here, the body. But in recent years, I've started leaving this empty, and I just think it puts a little more weight back here, and I get a little more swim with it, if that makes sense. So that's sitting like so, and then we want to put some legs on it. So when damsels swim, they swim with, they move like a little snake, and then they rest, and they extend their legs like as stabilizers, and they sink a little bit, and then they get their strength back again, and then take off and start moving again. So when I'm retrieving this is a fly I would typically fish in and around weed beds, even when damsels, you know, they're predators, so they move from point A to point B to find food, which gets them in trouble. Obviously when they migrate, they swim up to the surface and then swim just below the surface towards shore, where they crawl out and transform into the adult stage. So they're always up near, so you're going to fish these generally shallow floating lines, midge tips, clear intermediates, hover lines, things like that. So I'm going to use, this is Brahma hen, comes on a bigger cape. I've just plucked a feather up on top. It's quite a long feather, so I'm just going to prepare this, because this feather could actually be used for a number of damsel nymphs. So I'm just going to strip all this fluff and junk off, and then I'm going to come in, and I'm just going to isolate the tip. I'm going to pull back a little bit, like so, and I'm going to come in and trim that little bit off. Whoops, not quite that aggressively. And then I want, this damsel flies have 6 legs. I'm just going to maybe use about 8 fibers or so. I'm not counting. I'm just kind of getting a, don't overdress it. So I've got roughly an equal amount of a couple more fibers on this side, an equal amount like so. And I'm going to turn this around, and I'm going to lay this on top like so, deliberately long, hold it, 1 wrap, 2 wraps, and then carefully pull on it, and just use the split of the feathers to divide those legs so they stick out the side, like so, about that long. Right? And the beauty of tying in legs like this is if I tied, you know, a clump on this side and a clump on this side, that's 2 steps. And if I drop the clump or misalign them, I got to start over again. Because the feather stem is still intact here, it holds them together for me. And when I'm happy with their initial tie-in like now I can just come in and just trim out this, and I have another set of legs. All I have to do to make another set for another fly is do the same thing and just work my way down. And you can use big feathers because you can pull them to length. Now I just take and I just use my hands to position them better where I want them. And I can put a wrap on one side and kind of hold them in place on the other and get that nice sort of divided look I'm hoping for. And then to finish it off, I'm just going to take another little bit of the fur from the zonker strip that I had, the micro zonker, and I'm just going to again make fuzzy thread, very little on there. And I keep knocking my super glue off. I want a little bit more, so there's a little clump here. I'm just going to come up just a little bit. You can always add dubbing if you need it, but it's tough to take it off if you've got too much. So I'll just pull this wide a bit so you can see how I'm, whoops, that's too close. And I'll tilt this, so I'm just going to start here again, trying not to lock my legs out of whack. Maybe put a couple of wraps and then work that through, like so. I'm going to have to add a little bit more dubbing. So this is the benefit. I don't have any dye lot issues because all of this body material is all came from the same place. So I don't have to worry if I was using, you know, dubbing brand X and mink brand Y. They all sort of work, and I just sort of weave that through the top, trying not to misalign my legs. Get that wrapped around, and I just made a little defined head and come underneath. Whip finish. I could have put some super glue on there as well. Pull that in. And then just play with it and get your legs back where they want. Give it a squish. Like so. And that's your finished little Striptease Damsel. So again, you're just going to fish that. That's going to wiggle and move. You know, I've got one fiber here that's being a little unruly. Well, you know what? Goodbye. You can always, because again, they've only got 6 legs. So I get that nice little profile of these legs sitting out the side. They'll sweep back a bit when I strip it. And then this is going to sway and move through the water and give it some nice little wiggle. And it's been a good little pattern for me. Very simple tie. But I call that the Striptease Damsel. It's on my YouTube channel because of that strip that's used for the fly. Tilt that more so you can see it.
I guess I got more uses for Mom's mink coat.
Yeah, you just got to cut it in those really thin strips. So there you have it. 3 of my stillwater flies. We did the Balanced Leach to start. Then we went to the dark side and tied a booby. And then we did that more imitative strip damsel fly because it's probably the one insect most people associate with lakes. And just about every fish I've ever come across in lakes will eat one, right? And because they're predators, they're always getting themselves into trouble, going places they shouldn't, looking for food. You know, there's always somebody bigger and bigger on the block than they are. So any questions at all? Well, if you want to